Belovitz. And this is the boy that I liked, the one younger son at Moyers, and his dog. And the place where we were at the camp, that's the door into our the dorm thing. And the dining room thing was here, and then the kitchen behind, and then going that way across the front was the recreation area. And then up above was the the dormitory. But when I went back, when it was a pick your own, you parked your car. There was no hanky-panky. You know how around here you go for apples, and you put them in the trunk, and if you have the basket piled up like this, it doesn't matter. Well, there you went out on their wagons and picked the fruit, brought it back. Everything you picked was weighed. But the weighing place, when we went back, was in the part where our dorm was, or our rec room was. They had tractors. They used it for equipment in the winter. But I can't remember who those ones were. I think there's the back of them there in that one.
And you've got pictures of the kittens that you found that weren't popular with the house mother.
Yeah, well, she didn't like cats, so like Ralph let me keep them there, and we fed them. But this was from the Brock's Monument, I think, taken from part way up. And this is this Rittenhouses that I was telling you about. They were famous afterwards for rug dyes. They had rug hooking classes, apparently, and they were famous for the different dyes that they'd created, like for the wool and that for the rugs. I read about it in your years, but this was Rittenhouses, and they had a pond, and they had swans. And the picture starts with the swans back a bit, and then they're coming closer and closer, and I think I ended up outside the fence taking the pictures, because the little buggers, they're not little, they're big, and they come at you like this with their heads down, and they mean business.
Yeah, you go ahead. Go ahead, Ardyss, and just tell us stories as you go along. That's good.
This is my trip to Toronto. I said this was my university education. I went to visit Babs, and there's a cannon outside the University of Toronto, and that's me, and that's Babs and I. And look at her legs. She was so thin. I said they look like toothpicks next to mine, and this is her on the cannon. And this is her. We opened we were opening the door going into the university, but it was locked. We couldn't get in. And this is us sitting on the lion or whatever it is at the front. That's me and that's her. And this is the two of us. Nice. And that was 40, must have been that fall, after we'd been in the farm service, I'm pretty sure. But she lived on Major Street, which wasn't far from, this was a Santa Claus parade when I was about 11. I had a broken toe. And that was the cow jumped over the moon. And there was a Negro lady standing beside us, and it was so crowded, and the adults kept pushing, and she said, move back, so the children can see Santa.
Are there some more farm service pictures in your book?
I don't think so. No, I think
did we miss something at the front? I don't think I videoed you when you had the book first open, Ardyss.
Oh, this was me growing up, but that's me with my banana on my head. I was visiting a friend of mine, and this was our idea of a what do you call it? A risque. My girlfriend and I was visiting her, and we went back in the bush and took a picture of us like this. I mean, we were decent compared to what they are now. And that's the two of us. I went to school with her. She was from Bayfield. She's still living.
What's her name?
Bev Pounder. She was Bev York, but she was Bev Pounder now.
Is she still in Bayfield?
Yeah, she and her husband owned a motel above a Bayfield, but he's dead now. So, and her daughter, Melody something. She was the one that did the news things for the record in Clinton. I don't think there's anything more to do with farm service. These are all just.
So would you describe your summers with farm service?
These are the airmen I was telling you about. That's the one that went back and was killed. He went to be a part. And that's my dad and my dog. They were riding tricycles over in Elora. And this is over in the Elora Gorge. My cousins, this is Stan, my oldest cousin, from that family of, well, he had an older sister, Phyllis. But they built these cedar things because they spent a lot of time down in the gorge. This was my aunts and uncles, and that's my Uncle Al and Geordie. They were up in Kirkland Lake. My mom and two of her friends drove up there in 1938 with 3 kids.
Ardyss, would you describe your summers as 2 of the best summers of your life?
Oh, yes, because I had sisters. This is me when I was young.
Yeah. So you were a single child, so all these girls at farm camp just suited you great.
Well, that's what I said at Cottam. Some reason or other I thought there were 75, but I don't think there could have been. I couldn't have forgotten all that many. And I can't figure out, I can picture it. And like it went in the one door, and I can still hear Pee-wee that night she got fined because she wouldn't shut up. That's my mom and dad. And that's my dad up in Listowel. This lady, I went up to see them after my dad died. My dad shot my stepmother and shot himself back in '83, so that was no fun. And that's my mom and dad. But when they went to the beach, look at how they dressed up. And that's mom and daddy over at Wallenstein. And here's a picture. This is one of the lies I told my kids, Bonnie. That's me at a year old up in Wallenstein. My dad is dangling my feet in the water. And my husband was about 3.5 years older than me, and they lived up on 86 Highway. I said, Daddy saw me when I was a year old and said, that's the girl I'm going to marry. That's my mum and me. Toots at 5 months, I think it is. And this is up at Ball's Bridge by Auburn and Blythe.
Okay, I was just
Family.
there last night.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's my grandfather with the hat on there on the far side.
Oh my goodness.
And this is me when I was a kid. And I almost think I can remember that picture because I was mad as hops and I was frowning in it. That was down at my grandmother's. My grandmother lived in a house down by the railroad tracks in Clinton. And I don't know, she baked a cake one time, and I still don't know why they did it, but this cake was something about it. It was called a burnt sugar cake. That's my mom and dad. That's about the best picture I ever had of her. The Legion wanted a picture of her. She was a past president, and they were putting them in the lobby, you know?
Yeah.
And I couldn't find a good picture, and that one I didn't think was great. But I had one of her, she and Daddy were godparents for my one cousin, but she was all dressed up, and that didn't look right. So I had a picture, it's not in here, but it's a 4-generation picture of my grandmother and my mother and me and 4 of my kids. And she looked the most natural and nice in that, so we took that out of the picture and they enlarged that. But that's Daddy and I. And this is me. I still had that club bag in my house, and that was me when I was about 4. But this was a peach tree, and there was another window here in this house, and my grandmother baked this cake, and for some reason they put it out on the lawn, and my mother drove our car over it, and the cake went down and came up again. And my grandmother laughed so hard, the window went loose and fell in the back of her neck. And my grandfather gave my mother hell for making fun of her mother's baking, and it was Nanny's idea to do it. This is a 4-generation picture of my mom and me and my grandfather and his mother. And this is one. And this guy, I think it is, he lived on Victoria Street when I came down here. And I went to see them, and I knew he had, I forget, 4 or 5 kids, but I didn't know all of them. But the one time up in I was at bingo, and this friend of mine, she was talking to somebody, and I said, oh, Marge, do you know everybody in here? And she said, no, just the ones from Kitchener. So she said, this is Forey and Millie. And I said, where do you live in Kitchener? And that's all she told me. And they said, oh, they lived on Highland Road. And I thought, where on Highland Road? And I thought, well, that's sort of bold. I said, the reason I'm asking, I live on Hyman Street. Oh, well, we live just around the corner. I said, well, I hate to tell you, but I think you're my cousins. And it was Forey, and he had never seen this picture, but that's him and the baby. That was his, this was Uncle Andy, that's right. That's Uncle Andy, and that was him back, where is he? He's got a baby. That must have been Andy. Because it was Uncle Bob, and then this was with Jim, and Aunt Minnie, and my grandfather, and Mum, and me. But we were the babies in here anyway, and there's another baby here, but you can't see the face. I don't know why. Maybe it's got his head over his shoulder.
Which one's you? Where are you?
This is me right
Yeah.
here.
Cute.
And I have a picture of me on my grandmother's grave in Stratford chewing spruce gum. They used to give you the gum off the spruce trees to chew.
Oh,
Cheapies.
like a